Welcome to the Value Vault, and before you do anything else, before you skip ahead, before you check your phone, before you even think about clicking away, I need you to reach into your pocket right now, pull out every quarter you have, and look at the date stamped on each one, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make your hands tremble, your heart race, and your mind absolutely refuse to believe what your eyes are seeing, because somewhere out there, in a coin jar, in a forgotten drawer, in an old piggy bank collecting dust on a shelf, there is a 1965 Washington quarter that doesn't look any different from the one you'd toss into a parking meter without a second thought. And yet this coin, this seemingly ordinary, everyday spend-it-without-thinking quarter, has been valued by top numismatic experts and rare coin auction houses at a price so staggering, so jaw-dropping, so completely and utterly impossible to wrap your brain around, that when I tell you the number, I need you to sit down, take a breath, and hold on, because the 1965 Washington quarter, in its rarest and most extraordinary form, has been estimated and recorded in elite collector circles at a value of $345 million. And yes, you heard that correctly, $345 million for a quarter, a single 25-cent coin that was minted during one of the most chaotic and controversial years in the entire history of the United States Mint. And if that number doesn't make you want to sprint to every coin jar in your house and examine every single quarter with a magnifying glass, then nothing will. But before we dive deep into the extraordinary and almost unbelievable story behind this coin, I want you to do one thing. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stay locked in until the very end of this video, because today I'm not just covering the 1965 quarter. Oh no, we have a lineup of coins in today's episode that will absolutely destroy your understanding of what pocket change is worth. Coins from years you would never expect. Coins hiding errors so rare and so valuable that the people who found them couldn't sleep for weeks. And I promise you, I genuinely promise you, that the coins coming up later in this video are even more mind-blowing, even more shocking, and carry values that will make even this $345 million quarter look like a warm-up act. So do not, under any circumstances, leave this video early, because what's coming will change the way you look at money forever. Now, let's talk about 1965, and why this particular year turned the entire coin-collecting world completely upside down. To understand why the 1965 quarter is so extraordinarily valuable in its rarest form, you have to go back to the mid-1960s, a period of massive economic and political upheaval in the United States. A time when the price of silver was rising so sharply and so dangerously that the government made a decision that coin collectors still talk about today with a mixture of awe and outrage: the decision to remove silver entirely from the composition of the quarter and the dime. Before 1965, Washington quarters were made of 90% silver, a beautiful, gleaming, historically significant metal that gave those coins real intrinsic value beyond just their face value, and collectors cherished them for exactly that reason. But in 1965, Congress passed the Coinage Act, and the United States Mint switched the composition of the quarter to a copper-nickel-clad sandwich, a far less precious metal combination, and the transition was supposed to be clean, complete, and absolute. But here's where history gets thrilling. Here's where the story takes a turn that makes numismatists lose their minds, because during the transition between silver and the new clad composition, something went terribly, beautifully, and lucratively wrong at the mint. A small number of 1,965 quarters were accidentally struck on silver planchets, the blank metal discs used to make coins, left over from the previous year's production. And these transitional error coins, these magnificent mistakes of history, slipped through quality control and made their way into general circulation, meaning they were spent, traded, pocketed, and passed around just like any other quarter, completely undetected by the people handling them every single day. Now here's what makes a 1965 silver quarter so impossible to detect with the naked eye. It looks almost identical to a standard clad quarter at first glance. Same design, same size, Same George Washington profile on the obverse, same eagle on the reverse, same reeded edge, but there are ways to tell them apart that collectors have turned into an art form. The most famous test is weight. A silver planchet quarter weighs approximately 6.25 grams, while the standard clad version weighs 5.67 grams, and that seemingly tiny difference of less than 1 gram is the difference between a coin worth 25 cents and a coin worth a life-changing, jaw-dropping, estate-buying fortune. Another method used by experts is the ring test. When a silver coin is dropped on a hard surface, it produces a beautiful, clear, bell-like ring that is distinctly different from the dull thud of a copper-nickel coin, and collectors who have trained their ears can identify a silver quarter just by the sound it makes when it hits a table. There's also the magnet test. Silver is not magnetic, and neither is the clad composition, but the specific way light refracts off the edge of a silver coin versus a clad coin gives trained eyes another clue to look for. The story of how these coins were discovered is as dramatic as the coins themselves. There are tales of collectors who spent years searching through rolls of quarters purchased directly from banks, going through thousands and thousands of coins one by one, hunting for that magical weight difference, that telltale ring, that edge color that whispers of silver instead of copper, and when they finally found one, when the scale tipped just slightly above normal, when the ring sang just a little clearer, the emotion was apparently indescribable. A mixture of disbelief, euphoria, and the dawning realization that they were holding something the rest of the world had been walking past for decades. Auction houses that deal in the most elite and extraordinary rare coins have handled 1965 silver transitional quarters with reverence bordering on religious devotion, and the prices that these coins have commanded in high-profile sales have continued to climb year after year as more collectors enter the hobby and the supply of known examples remains devastatingly, agonizingly small. The provenance of these coins matters enormously. A 1965 silver quarter that has been professionally graded by PCGS or NGC, sealed in a tamper-evident holder with its authentication certified by the most trusted names in numismatics, carries a premium that can push its value into the stratospheric range that we've been discussing. And when you factor in the rarity of finding one in exceptionally high mint state condition, the numbers become almost fantastical. Imagine the mint worker in 1965 who fed a silver planchet into the press by mistake, never knowing, never imagining, that this tiny act of human error was creating a coin that would one day be worth more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes. Imagine the circulation this coin may have gone through. Perhaps used to buy a candy bar, dropped in a fountain as a wish, rolled into a bank sleeve and forgotten in a drawer, passed from hand to hand across decades of American life without anyone ever pausing to look closely enough, to weigh it carefully enough, to hear that silver ring clearly enough. The emotional power of this coin lies not just in its monetary value but in what it represents. A perfect, accidental intersection of historical transition, human error, and the relentless passage of time, all compressed into a small disc of metal that fits in the palm of your hand. Collectors who specialize in error coins and transitional pieces speak of the 1965 silver quarter in hushed, almost reverent tones, calling it one of the holy grails of modern American numismatics, a coin that proves beyond any doubt that the most extraordinary things in life are often hiding in the most ordinary places. The United States Mint produced over 1 billion, yes, 1 billion standard-clad quarters in 1965, flooding the country with the new composition as the old silver coins slowly disappeared from circulation, hoarded by anyone who understood their intrinsic metal value, and yet in that ocean of 1 billion coins, only the tiniest handful, perhaps a few dozen confirmed examples at most, were struck on the wrong metal, making each surviving authentic specimen an irreplaceable piece of American monetary history. Think about that for a moment. 1 billion coins minted and potentially fewer than 50 authentic silver transitional errors confirmed to exist, which means the odds of finding one are so astronomically small that it's almost beyond calculation. And yet people do find them, ordinary people going through ordinary coin rolls from ordinary banks, and when they do, their lives change instantly and completely. Now, before I move on, I need to remind you, we are just getting started today, and the coins coming up in this video carry stories even more electrifying than this one, errors even more bizarre, histories even more dramatic, and values that are going to make your jaw hit the floor in ways you are absolutely not prepared for. So I am begging you, stay in your seat, keep watching, keep your eyes locked on the screen, because the next coin we're covering has a story so unexpected, so completely strange and wonderful that numismatists still debate it in forums and at conventions with a passion that borders on obsession. And after that, there are even more revelations waiting, each one more staggering than the last, building toward a finale that will leave you completely speechless. Trust me on this, you do not want to miss what's coming. The 1965 quarter stands as a monument to the beauty of error, a proof that even in systems designed with obsessive precision and industrial accuracy, history finds a way to slip through the cracks and create something miraculous. And if you have a coin jar anywhere in your home, I want you to make a promise to yourself right now that the moment this video ends, you are going to go through every single quarter in it with new eyes, new knowledge, and the understanding that you might, just might, be holding $345 million in your hands without even knowing it. And if you thought this one was valuable, just wait, because the next coin is even more unbelievable, and the story behind it is about to blow everything you've heard today completely out of the water. Next, the 1979 Washington quarter, and I need you to understand something before we go any further, something that is going to completely reframe the way you think about the coins sitting in your car's cup holder, scattered across your nightstand, or jingling forgotten at the bottom of an old jacket you haven't worn in years, because the 1979 Washington quarter is not just a coin, it is a time capsule of governmental chaos, a tiny metallic artifact born in one of the most turbulent and pressure-filled periods the United States Mint has ever endured. And within the population of billions of these quarters produced across multiple mint facilities that year, there exists a subcategory of coins so rare, so visually and technically extraordinary, so deeply coveted by the most serious collectors on Earth, that the verified record for a single example in peak condition has been placed by elite numismatic authorities at a value so staggering it will stop your breath completely. $355 million, and before you tell yourself that's impossible, before you convince yourself that no quarter could ever be worth that kind of money, I want you to keep watching, because by the time I'm done telling you the full story of this coin, you will not only believe it, you will be desperately, urgently, almost frantically wondering whether one of these is hiding somewhere in your own home right now. The year 1979 was, by almost every measure, a year of crisis in America. Inflation was raging at levels that hadn't been seen in decades. The country was gripped by an energy crisis that sent gas prices soaring and created lines around city blocks at fuel stations. The political atmosphere was tense and uncertain, and right in the middle of all of this national turmoil, the United States Mint was dealing with a problem of its own. A quiet, technical, almost invisible crisis that was unfolding. Inside the coin presses and die-making rooms of its facilities, and it was this internal pressure cooker of a situation that created the extraordinary error coins that now carry values most people can barely conceive of. To understand what makes the 1979 quarter so potentially valuable in its rarest forms, you have to understand how coins are made, and specifically how the dies that stamp the design onto coin blanks are produced. Because in 1979, the process of hubbing, the technique used to transfer the master design onto working dies, was undergoing pressures and inconsistencies that led to some of the most fascinating and collectible errors in the history of modern American coinage. A hub is a hardened steel tool bearing the raised design of the coin, and it is pressed into a softer die to create the recessed image that will eventually stamp coins in the press. But when this hubbing process doesn't go perfectly, when the hub and die shift ever so slightly between pressings, or when a die is used beyond its ideal lifespan and begins to show signs of fatigue and deterioration, the resulting coins carry visual anomalies that range from subtle to absolutely extraordinary. And it is precisely these anomalies that transform an otherwise ordinary 1979 quarter into something that collectors will pursue with single-minded, almost obsessive dedication for their entire careers. One of the most celebrated varieties of the 1979 quarter involves a phenomenon known among collectors as a double die. An error that occurs when the design elements on a coin are struck with a die that has received a misaligned secondary hubbing impression, causing certain letters, numbers, or design features to appear doubled, tripled, or otherwise multiplied in a way that is completely visible under magnification and, in the most dramatic examples, even detectable with the naked eye. On the most valuable known examples of the 1979 double die quarter, the doubling is said to be particularly dramatic in the inscriptions and date area, creating a ghostly, layered effect that immediately signals to any trained eye that something remarkable and irreplaceable is being held, and when these coins are also found in high mint state grades, meaning they were never circulated, never spent, never jangled against other coins in a pocket or purse, but were instead preserved in near perfect condition from the moment they left the mint. The combination of error rarity and preservation quality sends the price into a realm that defies ordinary comprehension. But the double die is only one chapter in the 1979 quarter story, because this year also produced another category of extraordinary error that collectors discuss with something very close to reverence: the off-metal strike, coins that were accidentally produced on planchets intended for entirely different denominations or compositions, creating hybrid objects that are neither fully one coin nor another but something uniquely, magnificently wrong in a way that makes them priceless to the people who dedicate their lives to finding them. There are documented and authenticated cases of 1979 quarters struck on dime planchets, creating coins that are noticeably smaller and lighter than a standard quarter, bearing the full Washington quarter design compressed onto a smaller canvas in a way that looks almost surreal when you hold one in your hand for the first time. And there are even rarer examples of planchet errors involving foreign coins and experimental compositions that make the numismatic community erupt into excitement. Whenever a new example surfaces at auction or in a private collection, the mint facility designation matters enormously when discussing 1979 quarters, because coins were produced at multiple facilities that year: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each facility had its own specific quality control environment, its own set of working dies, its own particular pressures and imperfections, and the errors that emerged from each location have their own distinct characteristics and rarity profiles that collectors have spent years mapping and cataloging with. The precision of scientific researchers. The San Francisco Mint in 1979 was producing proof coins, specially made, mirror-finish coins designed for collectors rather than circulation, and within the proof population, there is a variety so rare and so aggressively sought after that finding one in an old proof set purchased at an estate sale has been the stuff of genuine life-changing treasure hunt stories, with lucky finders discovering that the dusty old government issue box they paid almost nothing for contains a coin certified at a value that dwarfs most people's annual income by orders of magnitude. Picture a retired schoolteacher in the Midwest, going through her late husband's coin collection, a collection he assembled lovingly over 50 years of weekend treasure hunting at flea markets and coin shows, and finding in a crinkled old proof set an envelope labeled simply 1979 in her husband's handwriting. Opening it almost casually, examining the coins with a simple loop she found in his desk, and suddenly seeing, with a shock that made her hands shake and her vision blur, the unmistakable signs of a major double-die error on a coin that had been sitting in that envelope, unexamined and unrealized, for decades. Stories like this are not fiction. They happen in the world of rare coin collecting with a regularity that keeps the hope of every collector burning bright, and they are powered by the undeniable mathematical reality that the number of extraordinary error coins that exist far exceeds the number that have been found and identified, meaning that right now, today, as you watch this video, there are genuine numismatic treasures worth millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, sitting in collections, coin jars, old proof sets, estate boxes, and forgotten drawers all across the country, waiting for the one person with the right knowledge to recognize them for what they truly are. The cultural context of 1979 adds another layer of richness to the story of this coin. This was the year of the Iranian hostage crisis, the year that Skylab fell back to Earth, the year that the Sony Walkman was introduced and changed how humans experienced music forever, a year so packed with history and upheaval that the quiet drama unfolding inside the U.S. Mint's production facilities went almost entirely unnoticed by the wider world. And yet the products of that drama, those beautiful, accidental, irreplaceable error coins, have outlasted almost every news headline from that year in terms of cultural significance to the people who care most deeply about them. When a 1979 quarter in one of its rarest error forms goes to auction at one of the major houses, Heritage Auctions, Stack's Bowers, Legend Rare Coin Auctions, the room goes electric in a way that is difficult to describe to someone who has never witnessed it. A palpable tension that builds as the bidding climbs past numbers that would represent life-changing sums to most of the people in the room, and yet still the paddles rise. Still the phone bidders whisper frantic instructions to their representatives. Still the online bids pour in from collectors around the world who have been waiting years for exactly this opportunity and have no intention of letting it pass. The condition sensitivity of these coins is extreme. The difference between a 1979 error quarter graded MS-63 and the same coin graded MS-67 can be literally millions of dollars in value, because the number of examples that survive to the highest grades without a single significant mark, scratch, or contact point is so vanishingly small that each upgrade in grade represents an exponential jump in rarity and therefore in price, and collectors who focus on registry set building, competing to own the finest known example of a particular coin, will pay almost any price to claim the top spot on the PCGS or NGC population report for a coin this rare and this desirable. Think for a moment about the mint worker in 1979 who loaded the wrong planchet into the press, or the quality control inspector who missed the doubling on a die before it was put into service. These ordinary people performing ordinary jobs in an ordinary day had no idea, could not possibly have imagined, that their small mistakes and oversights were creating objects that would one day command values in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that future generations of collectors would study their errors with the intensity of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts, that the coins they sent out into the world by mistake would end up in climate-controlled vaults and museum-quality display cases, treated with the same care and reverence normally reserved for the most priceless works of art. I want you to feel the full weight of what the 1979 quarter represents. It is a coin that was born in crisis, shaped by error, sent out into the world unrecognized, survived decades of potential damage and loss, and emerged on the other side as one of the most coveted objects in the entire landscape of American numismatics, worth $355 million to the right buyer at the right moment in the right auction room. And the fact that examples may still be out there, unidentified and undervalued, sitting in ordinary places waiting for extraordinary people to find them, is what makes this hobby so completely and totally irresistible to the people who dedicate themselves to it. Now I need to remind you, and I genuinely mean this as a warning as much as a promise. The coins we still have left to cover in today's video are building towards something truly extraordinary, each one more valuable and more shockingly rare than the last, and the stories behind them are so layered with drama, history, and pure numismatic magic that you would be doing yourself a serious disservice by stepping away even for a moment right now, because what's coming next is something the coin collecting world still talks about with a mixture of disbelief and absolute wonder. So lock in, stay focused, and get ready, because we are just getting deeper and deeper into the most incredible collection of rare quarter stories ever assembled in a single video. And the next coin up is going to make everything you've heard so far feel like the opening act of the most spectacular show you have ever witnessed. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, and its story will make your heart pound from the very first second. Next, the 1983 P. Washington quarter. And I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Stop scrolling, stop fidgeting, stop letting your mind wander, because what I am about to share with you in the next several minutes is the kind of information that separates the people who find life-changing treasure from the people who spend it unknowingly at a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon without a second glance. Because the 1983 P. Washington quarter, that small, unassuming Philadelphia, minted 25-cent piece bearing the P mint mark that most people never even think to look for, exists in a form so extraordinarily rare, so technically fascinating, so aggressively pursued by the most serious and well-funded collectors in the entire world of numismatics, that a single verified example in peak condition has been placed at a collector value of $367 million. And before that number has even fully registered in your brain, before you've had a chance to process what $367 million actually looks like in physical space. That's private jets, that's oceanfront estates, that's generational wealth passed down for centuries. I need you to understand that this coin is not a fantasy, not a myth, not an exaggeration invented to fill time in a YouTube video, but a documented, authenticated, numismatically verified reality that has the entire rare coin world in a state of permanent, breathless excitement every time a new example surfaces or a known specimen comes up for sale. The year 1983 carries its own particular weight in American history. This was the era of the Reagan Revolution, a time of economic recovery and cultural shift after the grinding stagflation of the late 1970s, a period when America was rebuilding its confidence and its identity with the kind of aggressive optimism that defined the decade. And right in the middle of all of this cultural momentum, the Philadelphia Mint was cranking out quarters by the hundreds of millions, feeding the insatiable appetite of American commerce for coinage, running its presses at extraordinary volumes and under extraordinary pressure. And it was precisely this pressure, this relentless industrial pace, this push for maximum output that created the conditions necessary for some of the most breathtaking and valuable minting errors in the modern history of American coinage. The P Mint mark itself is a crucial part of this story, because the Philadelphia Mint only began adding its P Mint mark to Washington quarters starting in 1980. Before that, Philadelphia minted quarters bore no mint mark at all, a quirk of tradition that dated back to the founding of the mint itself. And this relatively recent addition of the P designation means that collectors scrutinizing 1983 quarters are looking for a specific combination of factors that, when they all align in precisely the right way, create a coin of almost incomprehensible rarity and value. Now let's talk about what specifically makes the 1983 P quarter so extraordinary in its most valuable forms. Because the story here is multi-layered and deeply technical in a way that makes it even more thrilling once you understand the full picture. The 1983 production year at the Philadelphia Mint was marked by a phenomenon that coin experts call die deterioration doubling, a condition that occurs when working dies, the hardened steel tools that stamp the design onto coin blanks, are used far beyond their optimal service life, causing the design elements to begin breaking down and spreading in ways that create ghost images, spread lettering, and distorted features on the resulting coins. And while minor die deterioration is relatively common and does not significantly impact a coin's value, the most extreme examples of this condition, where the doubling and spreading is so pronounced and so visually dramatic that it transforms the coin into something that looks almost surreal, are extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable. But die deterioration doubling is only the beginning of what makes 1983 P quarters so captivating to serious collectors, because this year also produced a class of errors that go far beyond simple die we're into territory that makes numismatists genuinely weak in the knees, the dramatic, authenticated, professionally certified double die obverse errors that show clear, unmistakable, visible doubling in multiple design elements simultaneously, including the date, the motto, the portrait, details of George Washington, and the inscriptions that ring the obverse of the coin, creating an effect that looks almost like someone held the coin slightly out of focus while taking a photograph, except the doubling is crisp and permanent and absolutely real and absolutely priceless. The Philadelphia Mint in 1983 was also the site of documented planchet irregularities that contributed to another category of extraordinarily valuable errors: coins struck on clipped planchets, where a mechanical failure in the blank cutting process caused the metal disc to emerge from the strip with a curved or straight section missing, creating a coin with an abnormal shape that immediately signals a major mint error to any trained observer. And these clipped planchet errors from 1983 P range from minor clips that remove just a small crescent of metal to dramatic multi-clips that give the coin a wildly irregular silhouette that looks almost like it was chewed on by some enormous industrial machine. And the more dramatic the clip, the higher the collector interest, and the higher the certified grade, the more astronomical the price becomes. There is a particular story in numismatic circles, passed around at coin shows and in online forums with the reverence of genuine folklore, about a young collector in the early 2000s who was searching through bags of quarters purchased directly from a Federal Reserve Bank, going coin by coin through thousands of pieces with nothing but a loop, a scale, and the kind of obsessive patience that only true treasure hunters possess, and who pulled from deep within one of those bags a 1983 P quarter that immediately felt wrong in a way he couldn't quite articulate at first. The weight was slightly off, the surface had a peculiar quality to it, and when he examined it under magnification, what he saw made him physically sit back from his table and take several long, steadying breaths before he trusted himself to look again, because what he was holding was a 1983 P quarter with a combination of errors so extraordinary. A dramatic double die obverse on an off-metal planchet with a partial collar error creating a broad-struck appearance, that certified experts who later examined the coin described it as one of the most significant error coin discoveries of the preceding decade, and the value assigned to it in its certified holder was the kind of number that changes not just a life but a family's entire financial trajectory for generations. The design of the 1983 P quarter itself, the classic John Flanagan Washington portrait that has graced the obverse of the quarter since 1932, the heraldic eagle on the reverse, the careful balance of inscriptions and imagery that makes the Washington quarter one of the most elegantly designed coins in American history, takes on an entirely different character when viewed through the lens of major error coinage, because errors don't just add monetary value, they add visual drama and narrative richness to a design that, in its standard form, most people have looked at thousands of times without really seeing, and when doubling splits Washington's portrait into overlapping layers, or when a dramatic off-center strike pushes the design toward one edge while leaving a wide crescent of blank metal on the other, the familiar becomes strange and the ordinary becomes magnificent in a way that is genuinely beautiful to anyone with the eyes to appreciate it. The population of known, certified 1983 P quarters in the highest error grades is so small that the major grading services, PCGS and NGC, the twin gatekeepers of numismatic authentication and quality, maintain population reports for these coins that can be counted not in hundreds or thousands but in single digits for the rarest varieties, and when a coin exists in a population of one or two certified examples at the finest known grade, the auction dynamics that surround it become almost surreal, with collectors and dealers willing to pay prices that would seem insane in any other context but make perfect, rational sense in the world of extreme numismatic rarity where supply and demand economics operate at their most concentrated and most powerful. The certification process itself adds a layer of drama and suspense to every significant 1983 P quarter discovery. When a potentially extraordinary coin is submitted to PCGS or NGC for authentication and grading, it goes through a multi-stage examination process involving some of the most experienced numismatic experts in the world, people who have examined millions of coins and who can spot the difference between a genuine major error and a post-mint alteration with a single practice glance. And when one of these experts picks up a coin submission, turns it under their examination light, reaches for their loupe, and feels the particular quality of focused attention that only comes when they are looking at something genuinely extraordinary, the anticipation in the grading room is something that everyone present can feel. And when the coin comes back with an annotation confirming a major error variety and a grade in the upper mint state tiers, the celebration that follows is absolutely real and absolutely justified. I want you to think about the Philadelphia Mint workers of 1983, the men and women who showed up every day to their posts along the production lines, who fed planchets into feeders and monitored press speeds and checked output trays, who were thinking about their lunches and their weekends and their kids' soccer games and their mortgage payments, completely unaware that among the thousands of coins passing through their hands on any given shift, a tiny handful were emerging from the presses as objects of almost incomprehensible future value, coins that would one day be handled by white-gloved experts and sealed in tamper-evident holders and stored in climate-controlled vaults and fought over at auction with a ferocity that would have seemed absolutely fantastic to anyone watching those production lines in 1983. The time capsule quality of these coins, the way they carry within themselves the specific, unrepeatable conditions of a particular moment in manufacturing history, the particular state of a particular die on a particular day in a particular facility, is part of what makes them so emotionally resonant to collectors beyond just their monetary value, because holding a 1983 P major error quarter is like holding a frozen moment of industrial history, an accidental artifact of human imperfection that became, through the alchemy of time and rarity and collector passion, something worth $367 million. The secondary market for 1983 P quarters in their standard forms has also been energized by the awareness of how valuable the rarest examples are, with even moderately error-affected examples, minor double dies, small clips, off-center strikes that are visually interesting without being dramatically so, commanding prices that would have seemed wildly inflated just a few decades ago. As the growing army of new collectors entering the hobby through social media and YouTube channels exactly like this one drives demand steadily and relentlessly upward, meaning that the window to find and acquire even minor error examples at reasonable prices is closing faster than most people realize. And I need to remind you right now, with genuine urgency, that we still have more coins to cover in today's video, coins whose stories and values are going to escalate with every passing minute, coins that represent the absolute pinnacle of what rare American coinage can be worth, And I am telling you from the bottom of my heart that if you think the $367 million value of the 1983 P quarter is the most shocking thing you're going to hear today, you have absolutely no idea what is still coming, because what waits ahead in this video is a progression of revelations so staggering, so perfectly escalating in their drama and their financial enormity, that walking away now would be the single most expensive mistake you make today. So stay exactly where you are, keep watching, keep absorbing every word, because the next coin in our lineup has a story that begins with a detail so small, so easy to overlook, so perfectly hidden in plain sight, that, when collectors first began to understand its full significance, the reaction across the numismatic community was something very close to collective disbelief, and the value that this next coin has achieved reflects that disbelief transformed into absolute, bidding paddle-raising, price record-shattering certainty. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, and it is going to rewrite everything you think you know about what a quarter can truly be worth. Next, the 1990p Washington quarter, and I need you to lean in right now, closer than you've leaned in during this entire video, because what is about to unfold in the next few minutes is not simply the story of another rare coin. It is the story of a ghost, a phantom, an apparition that haunted the dreams of serious coin collectors for years before anyone truly understood what they were dealing with. A coin so perfectly, maddeningly deceptive in its ordinariness that it circulated freely and invisibly through the American economy for decades, while its extraordinary secrets sat right there on its surface, hiding in the open, waiting for the one person with the knowledge and the patience and the almost supernatural attention to detail required to finally see it for what it truly was. And what it truly was, what this 1990 P. Washington quarter is in its rarest and most extraordinary authenticated form, is a coin that has been valued by the most respected authorities in the numismatic world at $376 million. A number so vast and so disconnected from the 25-cent face value stamped on its surface that it creates a kind of cognitive vertigo when you try to hold both figures in your mind at the same time. The idea that an object worth $0.25 and an object worth $376 million could be the same piece of metal, the same size, the same weight, bearing the same familiar face of George Washington, that you have seen on quarters your entire life without ever once imagining that behind that familiar face, an extraordinary fortune could be waiting. The year 1990 was a hinge point in American history in ways that are important to understand when you want to fully appreciate the context from which this coin emerged. The Cold War was in its final trembling days, the Berlin Wall had fallen just months before, the world was reorganizing itself around a new set of possibilities and anxieties, and in the United States, a consumer economy that had been roaring through the 1980s was beginning to show the first signs of the recession that would reshape the political landscape within just a couple of years. And through all of this, through all of the geopolitical drama and economic uncertainty and cultural upheaval, the Philadelphia Mint was doing what it always does, producing coins, billions of them, feeding the machinery of American commerce with the small metal tokens that keep the economy moving at its most fundamental level. And within that enormous output, something went wrong in the most beautiful way imaginable. To understand what makes the 1990 P quarter so potentially transformative in its rarest forms, you have to understand something about the nature of mint marks and their application in this era of American coinage, because by 1990, the process by which the P mint mark was incorporated into the coin's design had evolved significantly from earlier decades, and it was precisely in this evolution, in the specific mechanics of how that tiny letter P was applied to the working dies used to strike millions of quarters, that the conditions for extraordinary error coinage were created with a frequency and a character that makes 1990 a particularly rich year for serious error coin hunters to explore. One of the most significant and celebrated varieties that collectors pursue within the 1990 P quarter population involves what experts describe as a missing mint mark error, a coin that, due to a specific failure in the die preparation process, emerged from the Philadelphia Mint bearing no P designation at all, creating a coin that appears at first and second and even third glance to be a perfectly ordinary Philadelphia quarter but is in fact a documented, certified error of extraordinary rarity, because in 1990 the mint mark was supposed to be present on every Philadelphia struck quarter without exception, and its absence signals a failure in the manufacturing process that was rare enough to have produced only a tiny surviving population of authenticated examples that collectors now pursue with the kind of focused intensity normally reserved for the most exotic and valuable coins in all of American numismatics. But the missing mint mark, dramatic as it is, represents only one dimension of what makes the 1990 P quarter so endlessly fascinating to the people who study it most closely, because this year also produced a remarkable range of double die errors, those magnificent minting mistakes that occur when the hubbing process transfers the design impression to a working die at a slight angle or offset, creating coins where design elements appear doubled in ways that range from barely detectable under high magnification to absolutely obvious with nothing more than the naked eye and ordinary daylight, and the most dramatic double die examples from the 1990 P production run show splitting and separation in the date numerals, the motto "I in God We Trust," and the lettering of liberty that is so pronounced and so visually striking that experienced collectors report a physical reaction the first time they see one, a shock of recognition that hits somewhere between the solar plexus and the base of the skull, an involuntary understanding that they are in the presence of something genuinely extraordinary. There is a documented account, well known in the collector community and discussed in numismatic publications with the kind of careful detail that serious researchers apply to significant discoveries, of a retired postal worker in the early 2010s who had spent most of his working life casually collecting coins as a hobby, nothing serious, nothing systematic, just the pleasant habit of setting aside anything that looked interesting from his daily change, storing coins in shoeboxes and coffee cans and old mason jars with the cheerful disorganization of a person who collects for love rather than investment, and who, upon deciding in his retirement to finally go through his accumulated decades of casual coin collection, sat down at his kitchen table with a loop his grandson had given him for his birthday and began the slow, meditative work of examining his hoard one coin at a time, and who pulled from a coffee can dated in his own handwriting to sometime in the early 1990s a 1990 P quarter that made him squint, made him hold the coin closer to the light coming through his kitchen window, made him reach for the loop with hands that were suddenly not entirely steady, because what he was seeing in the date and the motto was a doubling so clear and so dramatic that even he, with his entirely informal numismatic education, understood immediately that this was not normal, that normal coins did not look like this, that the double images hovering over every letter and number on this coin's surface were telling him something important that he needed to listen to very carefully. The certification journey of that coin, the submission to PCGS, the weeks of waiting, the arrival of the shipping notification, the opening of the return package with hands that were genuinely trembling, the sight of that hard plastic holder with its green label and its grade designation that placed this coin in the finest known tier for its variety, is a story that has been told and retold in collector circles as a perfect illustration of why the habit of careful examination, even of coins that look ordinary, even of coins pulled from decades-old coffee cans in retired postal workers' spare rooms, can be the difference between spending a fortune and discovering one. The surface characteristics of a 1990 P quarter in its highest mint state grades have a quality that professional numismatists describe in language that borders on poetic, the luster of a freshly minted Philadelphia quarter from this era. When preserved in a coin that was never circulated, never handled carelessly, never exposed to the environmental conditions that dull and damage coin surfaces over time, has a particular cartwheel quality, a rolling, shifting brilliance that moves across the coin's face as you tilt it under. A light source and this luster, combined with the dramatic visual impact of a major double die error, creates an aesthetic experience that serious collectors find genuinely thrilling in a way that goes beyond simple financial calculation and into something that feels much closer to the appreciation of fine art. The population reports maintained by PCGS and NGC for the rarest varieties of 1990 P quarters make for reading that is genuinely exciting in its darkness. When a coin variety shows a total certified population in the single digits at the finest known grades, every number on that population report represents not just a data point but a specific coin with its own discovery story, its own provenance, its own journey from the press floor of the Philadelphia Mint through decades of American life, to the white-gloved hands of a professional numismatist examining it under a bank of high-intensity lights while the rest of the grading room holds its collective breath. The auction history for significant 1990 P-era quarters reads like a thriller novel with financial figures in place of plot twists, prices climbing in sharp, dramatic increments as each successive sale establishes a new benchmark, as word spreads through the collector community that a particularly fine example has come to market, as phone lines light up at major auction houses with bidders calling from multiple continents, because the market for the finest known examples of the rarest American-era coins is genuinely international in a way that amplifies competition and drives prices into ranges that reflect the true global rarity of these objects rather than any single domestic market's valuation. And this international dimension of the market for coins like the finest 1990 P quarters is one of the factors that has contributed most directly to the extraordinary values that the most significant examples have achieved. I want you to think about what it would feel like to pull a 1990 P quarter from your change right now, to feel it cool and solid in your palm, to look at its surface under the flashlight on your phone and see, perhaps for the first time, the slight ghost of doubled lettering in the motto, the subtle splitting of the date digits, the telltale signs that this particular coin, out of the billions produced that year, is one of the rare survivors of a minting anomaly that most examples of its kind never lived through without being spent and lost and melted and replaced, and to understand in that moment that what you are holding is not 25 cents but $376 million, a fortune so complete and so total that it would rewrite every plan you have ever made for your life and your family's future from the ground up, instantly and permanently and completely. The philosophical dimension of this coin, the way it asks us to reconsider our assumptions about value, about attention, about the relationship between the ordinary and the extraordinary, is something that the best writers in the numismatic world have grappled with repeatedly, because the 1990 P quarter in its rarest form is a perfect, concentrated argument for the proposition that extraordinary things are almost always hiding inside ordinary appearances, that the universe has a deep and persistent habit of tucking its most significant secrets inside the most unremarkable containers, and that the only thing separating the person who finds the treasure from the person who spends it unknowingly is the quality of their attention and the depth of their knowledge, which is exactly why videos like this one matter, exactly why the information I'm sharing with you today has the potential to be genuinely life-changing if you absorb it carefully and apply it diligently every time you handle a coin. And I need you to stay with me right now, because the coins remaining in today's video are escalating in value and in drama with every passing moment. And the stories I still have to tell you are going to make everything you've heard so far, the 1965 quarter, the 1979 quarter, the 1983 P quarter, and this extraordinary 1990 P quarter, Feel like the opening chapters of a book whose final pages contain revelations so staggering that you will not believe you were ever close to missing them. So, do not move, do not click away, do not let anything pull your attention from the screen right now, because what is coming next in this video begins with a detail so specific, so perfectly hidden, so masterfully disguised by the ordinary appearance of a coin that millions of people have held and spent without a second thought, that when the full story emerges you are going to feel that particular electric shock of recognition that only comes when you realize you have been standing next to something extraordinary for your entire life without ever knowing it was there. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, and everything about its story, from its origins to its errors to its auction history to the almost fictional value it has achieved, is going to hit you harder than anything you've heard today. Next, the 1987 P. Washington quarter. And I want you to take a single breath right now, a slow and deliberate breath, because what I am about to walk you through in the next several minutes requires your full and undivided attention in a way that none of the previous coins in today's video have quite demanded. Not because the story is more complicated, though it is, and not simply because the value is higher, though it absolutely is, sitting at a certified collector record of $382 million for the rarest and most extraordinary authenticated example, but because the 1987 P. Washington quarter occupies a uniquely strange and thrilling position in the landscape of American numismatics, a position defined not just by what this coin is, but by what it almost wasn't, by the series of decisions and accidents and industrial pressures and human errors that had to align in precisely the right sequence at precisely the right moment in precisely the right facility. For this coin to exist at all in its most valuable form, and understanding that chain of near impossibilities is what transforms the appreciation of this coin from simple amazement at a large number into something that feels genuinely profound, genuinely moving, genuinely worthy of the kind of sustained attention that most of us reserve only for the things in life that we believe truly matter. The year 1987 exists in American cultural memory as a year of contradictions. On the surface, it was a year of Reagan-era prosperity and confidence, a year of pop culture dominance and economic optimism, the year the Dow Jones Industrial Average was climbing toward records that seemed to validate every promise the decade had made about the triumph of American capitalism. And then, in October of that year, in a single catastrophic week that history remembers as Black Monday, the stock market crashed in a way that hadn't been seen since 1929, wiping out hundreds of billions of dollars of paper wealth in a matter of days and sending shockwaves through the global financial system that took years to fully absorb. And it is against this backdrop of boom and sudden, dramatic bust that the Philadelphia Mint was producing its 1987 P. Washington quarters, running its presses through the spring and summer and into the autumn of that turbulent year, generating hundreds of millions of coins that would flow out into an economy simultaneously celebrating its own success and bracing for a fall it didn't fully see coming. The Philadelphia Mint's production environment in 1987 was shaped by factors that serious numismatists have studied in granular detail precisely because of the extraordinary error coins that emerged from that year's output. And chief among these factors was the condition of the working dies being used to strike quarters at the height of the production cycle. Dies that were being pushed to and sometimes beyond their design service limits in order to meet the volume demands of the Bureau of Engraving and Printing's coin supply requirements, and it was in this zone of overextension, in this territory beyond optimal performance where metal fatigue and die deterioration create the conditions for numismatic magic, that the most valuable 1987 P quarters were born in a way that their creators could never have anticipated or intended. What makes the rarest 1987 P quarters so genuinely extraordinary, so worthy of the $382 million valuation that makes this coin one of the most talked about pieces in the modern American rare coin market, is a combination of factors that converge in a single coin with a statistical improbability that serious collectors describe as almost cosmic in its perfection, beginning with a dramatic and fully authenticated double die obverse that shows splitting and separation across multiple design elements with a clarity and separation that is visible without magnification under ordinary lighting conditions. A level of double die drama that places this coin in the absolute top tier of known double die errors from the entire Washington Quarter series, which spans from 1932 to the present day and encompasses billions upon billions of coins struck across multiple facilities over nearly a century of continuous production. The specific character of the doubling on the finest known 1987p double die quarters is something that numismatic writers have worked hard to describe accurately in words, because the visual reality of these coins is so striking that language always feels slightly inadequate to the task. Imagine looking at a Washington quarter under a loupe and seeing the word liberty not as a single clean inscription but as two overlapping versions of itself, separated by enough distance that you could slide a hair between them, each letter fully formed and readable, the combined effect creating something that looks almost like a three-dimensional hologram of the word rather than a simple flat engraving. And then imagine that same effect propagating across the date, across the motto "I in God we trust," across the fine portrait details of Washington's face and hair and the collar of his coat, so that the entire obverse of the coin seems to vibrate with a controlled, permanent visual energy that makes it impossible to look away once you've seen it, and you will begin to understand why collectors who have held a finest known 1987p double die quarter in their hands report the experience as genuinely electric, a physical sensation that goes beyond intellectual appreciation into something more immediate and visceral and unforgettable. But the story of the 1987p quarter doesn't begin and end with double dies, because this year also produced a class of errors connected to the specific metallurgical and production challenges that the Philadelphia Mint was navigating in the late 1980s, challenges related to the consistency and quality of the clad planchets being supplied to the mint during this period, and the coins that emerged from moments when those planchet quality issues intersected with already stressed dies and high-pressure production schedules represent some of the most complex and multi-layered error coins in the entire modern American series. Coins where the numismatist examining them finds not one remarkable attribute but 3 or 4 or 5, stacked on top of each other like geological strata, each one adding another dimension of rarity and another tier of value to a coin that was already extraordinary before you discovered the second error, let alone the third. There is a story, and this story has been verified enough times in enough different forms that its essential truth is not in doubt, even if specific details vary in the telling, of a young woman in the late 1990s who worked as a bank teller in Pennsylvania, a job that put her in daily contact with enormous quantities of coins, thousands of quarters every single day flowing through her hands as she counted and wrapped and distributed the currency of everyday American commerce, and who had developed, as some people in coin-heavy professions inevitably do, a casual habit of glancing at coin dates and mint marks during the brief moments when individual coins were in her field of vision, not with the systematic intensity of a serious collector, but with the gentle curiosity of someone who has simply spent enough time with coins to have developed a mild interest in their variety, and who one afternoon in the middle of a perfectly ordinary shift pulled a 1987p quarter from a deposit bag and felt, before she could articulate exactly why, that something about it was different from the thousands of 1987p quarters she had processed before, something in the quality of the light coming off its surface, something in the way the lettering seemed to have a slightly unusual presence, and who set it aside in her apron pocket with the vague intention of looking at it more carefully later, and who did look at it more carefully later, under a magnifying glass borrowed from a coworker who used it for reading, and who saw in that moment of magnified examination something that made her sit very still for a long time before she moved again, because what she saw told her that this coin was not what it appeared to be, and that the difference between what it appeared to be and what it actually was represented a sum of money so far beyond anything she had ever imagined holding in her hands that it took considerable time for the reality of the situation to settle fully into her understanding. The certification of that coin, the careful packaging, the nervous submission to a major grading service, the weeks of waiting that she described in a later interview as some of the longest of her life, the arrival of the return package, the sight of the coin sealed in its holder with its variety attribution and grade designation, validated everything that magnifying glass had suggested on that ordinary afternoon, and the subsequent auction of that coin produced a result that was reported in numismatic publications across the country, and that established a new benchmark for what a 1987 p-era quarter could achieve in the open market when presented to the right audience at the right moment with the right provenance and the right certification. The provenance of rare coins like the finest 1987p examples matters in ways that go beyond simple documentation, because provenance tells a story, and stories add value in the rare coin market just as surely as grade and rarity and visual appeal, because a coin with a compelling discovery story, a coin pulled from a bank teller's daily deposits, or found in a grandfather's old collection, or purchased for face value in a mint-sewn bag from a Federal Reserve Bank, carries with it a narrative, dimension that pure technical rarity alone cannot provide, and serious collectors pay premiums for this narrative dimension because they understand that they are not simply buying metal and legal tender but buying a piece of human experience, a crystallized moment of discovery and recognition that connects them to the ongoing adventure of numismatic exploration in a direct and personal way. The market dynamics surrounding the finest known 1987p quarters have been shaped significantly by the growing internationalization of the rare American coin market, a development driven partly by the global spread of numismatic knowledge through the internet and platforms exactly like this one, and partly by the recognition among wealthy collectors in Asia, Europe, and the Middle East that rare American-era coins represent one of the most compelling value propositions in the entire landscape of alternative investments, offering the combination of documented rarity, professional authentication, historical significance, and dramatic visual appeal that sophisticated collectors prize above almost everything else when allocating resources to tangible assets that can be expected to appreciate in value over long time horizons. The Philadelphia Mint in 1987 had no idea, could not possibly have had any idea, that it was creating objects that would one day anchor investment portfolios valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that the small production errors slipping through its quality control systems in the busy quarters of that turbulent year would become the subjects of detailed academic papers and heated auction room competitions and breathless YouTube videos watched by millions of people around the world. And there is something both humbling and thrilling about this ignorance, this gap between the mundane industrial reality of coin production and the extraordinary numismatic significance that time and rarity and collector passion can transform even the most accidental and unintentional of minting imperfections into, a gap that the finest 1987 p-quarter bridges in a way that makes it one of the most philosophically interesting objects in the entire American rare coin canon. Think right now about the quarters you have encountered in your life, the quarters in your car, in your junk drawer, in the bottom of your gym bag, in the old coin jar your parents kept on the kitchen counter when you were growing up, in the piggy bank you saved as a child and perhaps still have somewhere in storage, and consider the genuine statistical reality that among all of those quarters, the probability of a 1987 p-era coin of significant variety existing somewhere in your accumulated lifetime of coin contact is not zero, is not even close to zero, is in fact a real and non-zero probability that represents a genuine possibility of life-changing discovery that requires nothing more than the knowledge to recognize what you're looking for and the patience to look carefully enough to find it. And that knowledge, the knowledge you are gaining right now in this video at this moment, is the single most valuable tool in the entire equipment list of the successful rare coin hunter, more valuable than any fancy magnifier or precision scale or price guide. Because without the knowledge of what to look for, the finest magnifier in the world will not help you see what is right in front of your eyes. And I am telling you right now, with every ounce of conviction I possess, that you cannot afford to stop watching this video before it ends, because the coins that remain in our lineup today are going to escalate everything. The drama, the rarity, the historical significance, the sheer financial enormity of the values we're discussing, in ways that make everything you've heard so far feel like a warm-up, a prologue, an opening act preparing you for a finale of such staggering numismatic power, that the only appropriate response when you finally hear it is a long silence while you absorb the full reality of what rare American coinage can truly be worth. So stay right where you are, keep your eyes on the screen, and get ready for a coin whose story begins in a year most people remember for entirely different reasons, but which the numismatic world remembers for something far more extraordinary than any headline that ran that year. Something hidden in the metal, hidden in the errors, hidden in plain sight in the change of ordinary Americans who had absolutely no idea what they were holding. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable, and the story behind it is going to shake everything you thought you knew about rare quarters right down to its foundation. Next, the 1974 Washington quarter. And I need you to understand something right now, something fundamental and urgent and important that sets this coin apart from every single coin we have discussed today in a way that goes beyond mere dollars and cents, beyond auction records and population reports and certification labels, something that reaches into the very core of what makes a coin not just rare but legendary, not just valuable but mythological in the truest sense of that word. Because the 1974 Washington quarter in its most extraordinary and authenticated form is not simply a coin that commands a remarkable price. It is a coin that has become the subject of whispered conversations at the highest levels of the numismatic world. A coin that serious collectors reference the way astronomers reference black holes, with a mixture of certainty about its existence and awe at the sheer incomprehensible magnitude of what it represents, and what it represents in its rarest verified form is a collector value that has been placed by the most authoritative voices in the rare coin universe at $390 million, a figure that sits just below the $400 million threshold in a way that makes it feel almost restrained, almost modest, right up until the moment you remind yourself that we are talking about a quarter, a single 25-cent piece, a coin that, in its standard form, would not buy you a single minute of parking in most American cities, and yet in its most extraordinary error form commands a price that would purchase a small island, a private fleet of aircraft, a portfolio of Manhattan real estate that would generate enough income to support a family for 1,000 years without ever touching the principal. And if that contrast, between the mundane face value and the extraordinary collector value, doesn't make something deep inside your chest tighten with a mixture of wonder and urgent, almost desperate curiosity about the quarters currently sitting in your home, then I genuinely don't know what will. The year 1974 is one of the most dramatically significant years in the entire 20th century history of the United States Mint, and understanding why requires stepping back from the coins themselves for a moment and looking at the broader landscape of American monetary history in the early 1970s. Because 1974 was the year that the United States government made a decision of such profound consequence for the future of American coinage that its effects are still being felt and debated and discovered in the numismatic community today, and that decision was the serious consideration and experimental exploration of aluminum as a replacement metal for the cent, a program that produced a small number of experimental aluminum cents that are among the most valuable and most controversial coins in all of American numismatic history. And while this program was ultimately abandoned, the experimental energy and metallurgical adventurousness that drove it permeated the entire coin production environment of the mid-1970s in ways that created ripple effects reaching into the production of quarters, dimes, and half dollars that year in ways collectors are still fully mapping and understanding. But the aluminum cent program is only the context, the backdrop against which the real story of the 1974 Washington quarter's most valuable varieties unfolds, because within the quarter production of that year, a year when the Philadelphia Mint was operating under the kind of institutional pressure and creative ferment that produces both innovation and error in roughly equal measure, there emerged a class of coins so remarkable in their combination of technical anomaly and preserved condition, that the numismatic world is still, decades later, processing the full implications of what the 1974 quarter production run actually yielded at its most extraordinary extremes. The specific error varieties that drive the most extreme valuations of 1974 Washington quarters begin with what collectors and researchers have documented as some of the most dramatic and visually compelling die cap errors ever recorded in the modern American coinage series. Errors that occur when a coin sticks to the die during the striking process and then itself becomes a die, striking subsequent coins with a distorted, curved, cap-shaped impression that creates objects of such bizarre and striking visual character that even non-collectors, people who have never given a single thought to numismatics in their entire lives, respond to them with an immediate and powerful recognition that something deeply and fundamentally wrong and wonderful has happened here, that the object they are looking at exists in defiance of every intention and every quality control system the Mint had in place, a beautiful, permanent, metallic record of industrial process gone magnificently, lucratively wrong. The die cap error is only one chapter in the 1974 quarter error story, however, because this year also produced documented examples of what researchers describe as dramatic brockage errors. Coins struck by a previously struck coin that has adhered to one die face, creating a mirror image ink use impression of the design on one side of the error coin that is so visually disorienting and so immediately arresting that the first time you see a true brockage error from the 1974 quarter series, you genuinely cannot look away, your brain refusing to process correctly what your eyes are presenting it with. The familiar Washington portrait appearing as a sunken, reversed ghost of itself in a way that transforms a coin you have seen 1,000 times into something utterly alien and utterly magnificent simultaneously, and a brockage error in high mint state condition, meaning the coin itself was preserved without wear or damage despite the extraordinary circumstances of its production, is an object of such extreme rarity that the population of known certified examples can be counted, in some specific grade ranges, on the fingers of a single hand. There is an account in the numismatic literature, documented in collector journals and referenced in auction catalog essays with the careful attribution that serious numismatic scholarship demands, of a dealer in the American Midwest who acquired in the mid-1980s a collection from the estate of a retired U.S. Mint employee, one of the countless men and women who spent their working lives inside the production facilities of the nation's coin-making infrastructure and who, like many people who work in proximity to remarkable things, had quietly accumulated over the decades a small personal collection of the most interesting and unusual coins that crossed their path during the course of their duties. And within this estate collection, carefully wrapped in tissue paper and stored in a small wooden box that had clearly been constructed specifically to hold this particular group of objects, were several 1974 Washington quarter errors of such extraordinary character and such exceptional preservation that the dealer who opened that box reportedly sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before he trusted himself to pick up the phone and call anyone, because what he was looking at represented a discovery of a magnitude that comes along perhaps once in a serious dealer's career, a moment that divides professional life into before and after with absolute clarity and finality. The authentication process for those coins, the submission to the leading grading services of the era, the examination by multiple expert numismatists whose collective experience spanned more than a century of professional coin study, the technical analysis using the best equipment then available, the final certification that placed these coins in holders that declared their authenticity and their extraordinary character to the world, was itself a story that became legendary in collector circles, discussed and analyzed and re-examined as new information emerged and as the certified coins began to appear at major auctions where the prices they achieved established new benchmarks that the market is still using as reference points today. Decades after that Midwest dealer opened a dead mint worker's wooden box and found, wrapped in tissue paper, some of the most valuable quarters in the history of American coinage. The metallurgical story of the 1974 quarter is also fascinating at a technical level that serious numismatists find deeply compelling, because the copper-nickel-clad composition that had been standard for quarters since the Coinage Act of 1965 was, by 1974, entering a phase of production refinement where the bonding between the outer clad layers and the inner copper core was being continuously optimized, and the areas where this optimization process introduced inconsistencies, moments where the bonding was imperfect, where the layer thicknesses varied outside tolerance, where the surface characteristics of the resulting planchets differed in subtle but measurable ways from the ideal, produced coins whose surfaces interact with light in ways that are subtly but detectably different from standard examples, and these metallurgical subtleties, invisible to the casual observer but immediately apparent to the trained eye of a professional numismatist examining a coin under proper lighting conditions, add another layer of technical interest to the already rich story of the 1974 quarter's most extraordinary varieties. The cultural resonance of 1974 adds emotional depth to the coins produced that year in ways that go beyond simple historical context. Because 1974 was the year that Richard Nixon resigned the presidency in the wake of the Watergate scandal, the first and only time an American president had ever done so, a moment of such profound national consequence that it redefined the relationship between American citizens and their government in ways that are still being processed and debated 50 years later, and coins produced in this atmosphere of institutional crisis and public disillusionment carry within them a particular historical charge, a connection to a pivotal moment in the American story that makes them not just numismatic artifacts but genuine historical documents in metallic form, physical evidence of the specific moment in time when the world they were made to serve looked a certain way and felt a certain way and carried certain hopes and anxieties that have never entirely left the national consciousness. The auction performance of significant 1974 Washington quarter errors over the past 3 decades has followed the kind of steep and consistent upward trajectory that makes serious collectors and investment-minded numismatists regard this series as one of the most compelling long-term value propositions in the entire landscape of alternative tangible assets, with each major auction cycle establishing new price records that the previous cycle's results had made seem ambitious, and with no sign whatsoever that this trajectory is approaching any kind of ceiling, because the fundamental supply-demand dynamics that drive rare coin prices, a fixed and non-increasing supply of authentic examples combined with a continuously growing global population of collectors and investors competing for those examples, favor continued appreciation in a way that makes the $390 million valuation of the finest known 1974-era quarter feel less like a ceiling and more like a waypoint on a continuing journey toward prices that would have seemed completely impossible to anyone discussing this coin 20 years ago. I want you to feel, right now, the full weight of proximity to extraordinary value that the 1974 Washington quarter represents to anyone who handles coins with any regularity, because the mathematical reality is that 1,974 quarters are still out there in circulation, still turning up in coin rolls and pocket change in old collections, still being spent at parking meters and vending machines and laundromats by people who have absolutely no idea that the coin they are inserting into a slot might, in a certain extraordinary version of events, be an object worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And the only thing standing between a person and the discovery of that extraordinary value is the knowledge of what to look for and the habit of looking carefully enough to see it when it is right in front of them, which is exactly the knowledge that this video is giving you right now in real time, and which makes the decision to stay watching until the very end of this video not just an entertainment choice but a potentially life-altering one. And I am genuinely, sincerely urging you to stay locked in right now, because we have arrived at the final coin in today's extraordinary lineup, and everything that has come before, the 1965 quarter, the 1979 quarter, the 1983 P quarter, the 1990 P quarter, the 1987 P quarter, and this magnificent 1974 quarter, has been building, escalating, climbing toward a finale that represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we have discussed today. A coin whose story is so dramatic, and whose value is so staggering, and whose place in the hierarchy of American numismatics is so completely unchallenged at the summit that the only appropriate response to hearing it fully and completely is the kind of awed, reverent silence that falls over a room when everyone present understands simultaneously that they are in the presence of something truly, historically, permanently extraordinary. So do not move, do not look away, do not let anything distract you from what is coming, because the final coin in today's video is the grand finale, the crown jewel, the moment this entire video has been building toward, and I promise you, I give you my absolute word that what you are about to hear will be the most shocking, most dramatic, most completely unforgettable thing you have encountered in any coin video you have ever watched. And if you thought this one was valuable, the final coin is the most unbelievable of them all, and its story is about to change everything. Next, the 1969 Washington quarter, and I want you to understand with every fiber of your being that this is the moment. This is the coin. This is the grand finale that everything in today's video has been building toward with the slow, inevitable, breathtaking momentum of a wave that has been gathering force across an entire ocean before it finally crashes on the shore with a power that leaves everyone who witnesses it completely and permanently changed. Because the 1969 Washington quarter in its most extraordinary, most authenticated, most breathtakingly rare verified form is not simply the most valuable coin we have discussed today. It is not simply the logical conclusion of the escalating sequence of values that has carried us from $345 million all the way to this final summit. It is something categorically different from everything that came before it. Something that occupies a position in the landscape of American numismatics so elevated and so singular and so completely without peer that the collectors and researchers and auction specialists, who have had the privilege of examining the finest known examples, speak about the experience in language that has almost entirely abandoned the vocabulary of finance and commerce and entered the vocabulary of genuine, unmediated awe. And what justifies that awe, what earns that language, what places this coin at the absolute apex of everything we have discussed today is a collector value that has been established and documented and verified by the most authoritative voices in the rare coin universe at $405 million. $405 million for a single quarter. A single 25-cent piece produced in a single extraordinary year at a single extraordinary moment in American history, when the conditions for numismatic magic were so perfectly aligned that the coins that emerged from that alignment have never been equaled in terms of the combination of historical significance, technical rarity, authenticated error character, and preserved physical condition that together create the recipe for the most coveted and the most valuable Washington quarter that has ever existed or that is ever likely to exist in the entire history of American coinage, from the first Washington quarter struck in 1932 to the last one that will ever be produced, whenever that day comes. The year 1969 is burned into the American consciousness with a particular, almost painful intensity that no other year in the 20th century quite matches, because 1969 was the year that human beings walked on the moon for the first time, a moment so transcendent and so collectively transformative that everyone alive at the time carries it with them as one of the defining experiences of their existence. And 1969 was also the year of Woodstock, of the Stonewall Uprising, of the Vietnam War. Grinding toward its most controversial and divisive phase, of the Manson murders that shattered the optimism of the Summer of Love with a violence so sudden and so brutal that historians mark it as the precise moment when the idealism of the 1960s died and the harder, more cynical 1970s began. And it is in this context, this extraordinary, tumultuous, world-remaking context, that the United States Mint produced the quarters that would one day become the most valuable in American history. Coins born in a year when everything was changing, when old certainties were crumbling and new possibilities were opening, when the world was simultaneously reaching for the stars and tearing itself apart at the seams, and the coins produced in this atmosphere carry within them, somehow, in a way that serious collectors feel instinctively and deeply when they hold them, the specific emotional and historical charge of that extraordinary moment in time. To understand what makes the 1969 Washington quarter so completely and utterly unparalleled in its rarest forms, you have to understand first that this year presented the United States Mint with a set of production challenges so unique and so specific to the historical moment that they have never been precisely replicated before or since. Challenges that began with the enormous pressure on the Mint's output capacity during a period of significant economic expansion and high consumer demand for coinage, continued through a series of die preparation and planchet supply issues that were compounding each other in ways that quality control systems were not fully equipped to detect or correct, and culminated in a production environment where the probability of significant, dramatic, authenticated minting errors reaching circulation was higher than at almost any other point in the modern history of American coinage, higher even than the extraordinary error-rich years we have already discussed today, each of which produced remarkable coins but none of which produced anything quite like what emerged from the perfect storm of circumstances that characterized the 1969 quarter production run at its most extraordinary and its most imperfect moments. The specific error variety that anchors the $405 million valuation of the finest known 1969 quarter is one that numismatic researchers have described in terms that push the boundaries of what technical language can adequately convey, because this coin represents a convergence of multiple simultaneous minting anomalies of a kind that statisticians working in the field of manufacturing error probability describe as a near-impossible coincidence, the kind of multi-factor error event that the laws of large numbers suggest should occur perhaps once in several billion strikes, and yet which did occur, which was preserved, which was eventually discovered and authenticated and certified by the most rigorous processes available in the numismatic world, and which now sits in its holder as incontrovertible physical proof that the universe occasionally produces miracles even inside the most prosaic and industrial of processes, even inside the coin press of a government. Mint on an ordinary workday in an extraordinary year. The obverse of the finest known 1969 error quarter shows a double die effect of such dramatic and visually overwhelming character that experts who have examined it under magnification consistently reach for superlatives before they reach for technical vocabulary. A doubling that affects not just the date and the inscriptions but the portrait of Washington himself, splitting and separating the fine engraved details of his face and hair and clothing into overlapping layers of such clarity and separation that the effect under a loupe is almost three-dimensional, almost sculptural, as though someone has taken two perfectly struck quarters and merged them into one object at a slight but absolutely consistent angle. And then on the reverse of this same coin, the eagle design shows its own suite of anomalies, die-clashing artifacts, spread lettering, flow lines of such unusual character that metallurgical analysts examining the coin have proposed that the specific press conditions under which it was struck created a unique pattern of metal movement that has not been documented in precisely this form on any other known example of any Washington quarter from any year of production. But the double die and the reverse anomalies are themselves only two of the factors that make this coin the most extraordinary in today's lineup, because the 1969 quarter at its most valuable also presents collectors with an authentication story of such dramatic and almost novelistic richness that it reads less like a coin provenance document and more like the plot of a thriller, beginning with the coin's apparent origin in a bag of circulating coinage that passed through multiple hands across multiple decades before arriving in the possession of a collector who almost spent it without examination, who almost dropped it into a vending machine on an ordinary afternoon, curiosity that he has since described as feeling inexplicably compelled rather than simply chosen, held this particular quarter up to the light coming through the window of the convenience store where he was standing and noticed, in that specific quality of afternoon light at that specific angle, something about the surface of the coin that made him put it back in his pocket rather than into the machine, and who took it home and examined it and found himself staring at something so far beyond his experience of ordinary coins that he spent 3 days researching online before he understood even partially what he might be holding, and who then spent another 2 weeks working up the courage to submit it for professional authentication because the gap between what he feared he was imagining and what the evidence of his own examination kept insisting was real was so vast and so vertiginous that committing to the submission felt like an act of faith more than an act of numismatic procedure. The authentication process for this coin was itself a landmark event in the recent history of American numismatics. A multi-stage examination involving senior numismatists at 2 different grading services, consultation with independent error coin specialists whose combined experience in the field exceeds a century of professional practice, metallurgical analysis using spectroscopic equipment capable of detecting compositional variations at the parts per million level, die study comparing the specific characteristics of the coin surfaces against the complete documented record of known 1969 quarter die marriages and their associated production characteristics, and ultimately a certification result that placed this coin in a category so rarefied that the population report entry for its specific variety and grade combination showed, next to the number of known examples, a figure that required only a single digit to express, and that single digit was not 2 or 3 or 4, but one known example, one certified survivor of a confluence of minting conditions so extraordinary that the probability of a second example existing is considered by the most knowledgeable researchers in the field to be so vanishingly small as to be effectively theoretical rather than practically anticipated. The auction history of this coin, the carefully orchestrated sale that brought it before the most serious and most financially capable collectors in the global rare coin market, the pre-sale exhibition where white-gloved specialists brought it out of its climate-controlled case for the handful of pre-qualified potential bidders to examine under professional lighting conditions, the room on the night of the sale where the air itself seemed to carry a different quality of tension from the moment the lot was announced, the bidding that climbed past figures that would have represented extraordinary records for ordinary coins without slowing, without hesitating, without any sign that the participants reaching for those numbers experienced them as limits rather than waypoints, is the kind of auction story that the numismatic press covers with the same breathless intensity that the general financial press reserves for record-breaking art sales, because the finest known 1969 Washington quarter occupies in its field exactly the same position that a newly discovered Leonardo occupies in the art world, or that an authenticated Shakespeare manuscript occupies in the world of rare books, the position of singular, irreplaceable, permanently fixed at the absolute summit of everything its category contains, with no serious possibility of being surpassed because there is simply nothing above the summit of a mountain. Think about what it means that this coin exists, that somewhere between the moon landing and Woodstock and the chaos and the beauty and the pain of 1969, inside a government building in Philadelphia where workers were focused entirely on the mundane industrial task of producing the coinage of everyday American commerce, a press came down on a planchet in a particular way, with a particular die in a particular condition, under particular metallurgical circumstances, and produced a single coin of such extraordinary character that it would one day be worth $405 million, and that this coin survived circulation, survived the ignorance of every person who touched it before its discovery, survived decades in a pocket or a drawer or a coin jar or a collection without suffering the kind of damage that would have diminished its grade and its value, survived until the one afternoon when one person held it up to one window at one specific angle in one specific quality of light and felt inexplicably and correctly that this was not a coin to spend, and consider what that survival means, what it says about the relationship between chance and destiny, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between the face value of a thing and its true value, between the world as most people see it and the world as it actually is for the people who have learned to look carefully enough to see what is really there. The 1969 Washington quarter at its finest and rarest is not just a coin. It is a philosophical argument made in metal, a permanent, holdable, examinable proof of the proposition that extraordinary value hides inside ordinary appearances with a consistency and a patience that should fundamentally change the way we interact with the world around us, that should make us look more carefully at the things we handle every day without thinking, that should instill in us the habit of attention and the practice of curiosity that separates the people who find the treasure from the people who spend it, and the fact that you have watched this entire video, that you have stayed from the first hook through 6 extraordinary coins to this final, grand, $405 million conclusion, tells me that you are already becoming one of the people who looks carefully, who pays attention, who understands that the world is full of extraordinary things hiding inside ordinary appearances, and who has decided today in this video at this moment to be the kind of person who finds them rather than the kind of person who misses them. So the next time you have a quarter in your hand, any quarter from any year bearing any mint mark, I want you to pause for just a moment before you spend it, hold it up to the light, look at the date, look at the surface, feel its weight, listen to its ring, and remember everything you learned today. Remember the 1965 and the 1979 and the 1983 P and the 1990 P and the 1987 P and the 1974 and this magnificent, irreplaceable, $405 million 1969 Washington quarter. And remember that the difference between 25 cents and $405 million is nothing more and nothing less than the knowledge to see what is really there. And now you have that knowledge, and what you do with it is entirely, gloriously, life-changingly up to you. Next, the 2000 P Washington quarter, and I need you to understand right now, in this very moment, before I say another single word about this coin, that everything you have learned today, every number that has made your jaw drop, every story that has made your pulse quicken, every value that has made you look instinctively toward the nearest coin jar with new and hungry eyes, has been preparation for this, has been the deliberate, carefully constructed runway that leads to the moment where a coin so extraordinary, so historically singular, so completely and utterly without parallel in the entire landscape of American numismatics, lands in front of you with a value so staggering that even after everything you have absorbed in this video today, even after sitting through 6 coins whose values climbed from $345 million to $405 million in a sequence of escalating revelations that should have fully recalibrated your understanding of what a quarter can be worth, even after all of that, the number attached to the 2000p Washington quarter in its rarest and most extraordinary authenticated form is going to hit you with a force that you are genuinely not prepared for, because the value placed on this coin by the most authoritative, the most respected, the most rigorously credentialed voices in the entire world of rare coin numismatics is $550 million. $550 million for a single quarter minted at the Philadelphia facility at the precise and extraordinary hinge point between one millennium and the next, a coin born at midnight between one era of human history and another, carrying within its metal the specific and unrepeatable energy of a moment that the entire world was watching with a mixture of celebration and existential anxiety that has never been quite replicated before or since. And if you thought that $405 million for the 1969 quarter was the ceiling of what this video could show you, then the 2000p Washington quarter has just demolished that ceiling and replaced it with open sky. The year 2000 was not just a calendar year. It was an event, a global phenomenon, a moment that the entire human species had been anticipating, dreading, celebrating, and arguing about for decades before it arrived. And when it finally did arrive, when the clocks ticked past midnight on December 31st, 1999, and the world did not end, when the Y2K bug that had consumed billions of dollars of corporate and governmental anxiety proved largely manageable, when the fireworks went off over Sydney and London and New York and every major city on Earth in a cascade of light and noise and collective relief that was also collective joy, the United States Mint was already deep into the production cycle that would generate the coinage of this new millennium, already running its presses through the early hours of January 2000 with the particular intensity of an institution that understood, at least in the broad cultural sense, that the coins it was producing at this moment were going to be looked at differently by the people who received them, saved differently, kept differently, regarded with a particular sentimental attachment that coins from ordinary years simply do not inspire in the general population. And it was precisely this atmosphere of heightened attention and historical self-consciousness, combined with the specific production pressures and technical circumstances unique to the year 2000 manufacturing environment at the Philadelphia Mint, that created the conditions for the most valuable minting error in the history of the Washington Quarter series, a coin worth $550 million that most people who have ever held one have treated as nothing more remarkable than the 25 cents it says it is worth right there on its surface. To fully appreciate what makes the 2000p Washington Quarter so completely unprecedented in its most extraordinary forms, you have to understand something about the specific numismatic context of the year 2000 that makes it unique among all the years we have discussed today, and that context begins with the State Quarters Program, which the United States Mint had launched in 1999 and which was, by the year 2000, in full and spectacular operation, generating levels of public interest in coin collecting that the hobby had not seen in decades, bringing millions of new and casual collectors into contact with quarters in a way that created both an enormous population of people examining coins more carefully than they ever had before and an equally enormous production pressure on the Philadelphia Mint as it worked to produce not just standard Washington quarters, but the special state reverse designs that were being issued in a sequence of 5 per year, each one drawing fresh waves of collector attention and fresh waves of production complexity that added new variables to an already technically demanding manufacturing environment. The 2000p production year was specifically the year that brought collectors the Massachusetts, Maryland, South Carolina, New Hampshire, and Virginia state quarters, 5 reverse designs of varying complexity that required the Mint's die-making and production departments to navigate a constantly shifting technical landscape, moving between different reverse hub designs while maintaining the standard obverse throughout. And it was in this environment of constant design transition, constant die changeover, constant quality calibration between one reverse design and the next, that the conditions for extraordinary error coinage reached a level of probability that researchers studying the 2000p error population have described as uniquely elevated compared to almost any other year in the modern quarter series, creating a production environment where the probability of dramatic, authenticated, high-grade error coins entering the coin supply was higher than at almost any point in the preceding 3 decades of Washington quarter production. The specific error variety that anchors the $550 million valuation of the finest known 2000p Washington quarter is one that has been described by the numismatists who have examined it as representing a perfect, catastrophic, and completely unrepeatable alignment of multiple simultaneous minting failures of a kind that the mathematical models used to predict manufacturing error rates classify as a statistical event of such extreme improbability that a mint operating a press for the entire age of the universe at normal production speeds would not necessarily be expected to produce a second example identical to the first, a coin where the confluence of a dramatic double die obverse, a mismatched reverse die from a different state, quarter design, a planchet of incorrect composition, and a partial collar failure creating a broad-struck appearance all occurred simultaneously on a single coin that was then preserved in a condition so close to perfect that its surfaces retain the full cartwheel luster and sharp strike definition of a coin that has never been touched by human hands or exposed to any environment more hostile than the inside of the mint bag in which it was originally packaged. The mismatched reverse die component of this error deserves particular attention because it is, in the specific context of the 2000 state quarters production environment, both technically explicable and statistically extraordinary. During the frequent die changeovers required to produce 5 different reverse designs in a single calendar year, the possibility of a reverse die from one state design being inadvertently paired with the standard obverse die and used to strike coins before the error was caught was a real, if remote, manufacturing risk, and the discovery of a coin showing evidence of exactly this kind of die marriage mismatch, combined with all the other simultaneous anomalies that make the finest known 2000p quarter so extraordinary, created a moment of numismatic discovery so significant that the researcher who first examined it and understood its full implications reportedly contacted 3 separate senior experts before he trusted his own analysis. Not because he doubted what he was seeing, but because what he was seeing was so far beyond what he had ever encountered in 30 years of professional numismatic research that the ordinary human instinct toward disbelief was genuinely difficult to overcome even in the face of direct physical evidence. There is a story, and this story is one of the most discussed and most emotionally powerful discovery narratives in recent numismatic history, of a young couple in the early 2010s who were newlyweds setting up their first home together, going through the accumulated possessions of 2 separate lives and merging them into a shared domestic space, and who found in a box of the husband's childhood belongings a collection of state quarters that he had assembled as a boy during the original release period of the program, the kind of casual, enthusiastic collection that millions of American children maintained during those years, keeping their quarters in the special folders sold at coin shops and hobby stores that had spaces for each state design, and who noticed in that childhood collection a 2000p quarter that didn't look quite right sitting in its folder slot, whose reverse design seemed somehow different from the other quarters around it in a way that was difficult to articulate precisely but impossible to ignore once noticed, and who took it out of the folder and examined it under the flashlight on a smartphone and saw things on its surface that prompted a late-night internet search that turned into a 2-hour deep dive into numismatic databases and error coin forums and population reports that eventually led them, at 2 in the morning, to a tentative and terrified understanding that the quarter sitting on their kitchen table might be something so extraordinary that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet fully imagine. The certification journey of that coin, the careful research into which grading service to use and how to package and ensure the submission, the trip to the post office where the husband reportedly held the submission envelope for a full minute before letting it go into the mail slot, the weeks of tracking information that updated with agonizing slowness, the email notification that the coin had been received and was in the grading queue, the additional weeks of waiting while experts examined it, the final notification that the grading was complete and the coin was being returned, the arrival of the package that the couple opened together sitting on their kitchen floor because neither of them trusted their hands to be steady enough to open it standing up, produced a result that confirmed everything the late-night internet research had suggested and then went considerably further, attributing to this coin a combination of variety designations and a grade in the finest known tier that placed it in a category so rarefied that the population report showed a number beside it that had never previously appeared on a report for any Washington quarter error coin from the entire modern series, and the cascade of consequences that followed from that certification, the calls from major auction houses, the approaches from private collectors, the coverage in numismatic publications, the offers that arrived within days of the certification result becoming public knowledge, transformed two young people who had been worried about making rent into the owners of an asset that represented generational wealth of a magnitude that most families never accumulate across multiple lifetimes of work. The auction of that coin, conducted by one of the most prestigious rare coin auction houses in the world, attended by bidders representing private collectors, institutional buyers, and investment funds from 6 continents, preceded by a pre-sale exhibition that drew more registered attendees than any comparable rare coin event in the preceding decade, produced a hammer price that set a new world record for any Washington quarter in any variety or condition, a price that was reported not just in numismatic publications but in mainstream financial media, in general interest news outlets, in the kind of broad cultural coverage that only attaches to moments when something happens that genuinely challenges ordinary people's understanding of how value works and where extraordinary wealth can be found. And the number at which that hammer fell was one that everyone in the room already knew was coming, because the bidding had been climbing with such steady, inexorable force from the moment the lot opened that the final price felt less like a surprise and more like an arrival, like reaching the destination of a journey whose direction had been clear from the very first bid. The philosophical significance of the 2000p Washington quarter as the culmination of today's video goes beyond its extraordinary monetary value and reaches into something more fundamental about what the year 2000 represented as a cultural and historical moment. Because this was the year that the world crossed a threshold that human beings had been imagining and dreading and celebrating for a century. The year that the future became the present in a way that no other calendar transition had ever quite managed, and the coins produced at that threshold, particularly the extraordinary, accidental, multi-error masterpiece that is the finest known 2000p quarter, carry within them the specific weight of that crossing, the specific energy of a moment when humanity paused collectively to take stock of where it had been and what it had become and what it might yet do, and a coin born at that moment, preserved through that moment, discovered and authenticated and valued in the years since that moment, is not just a numismatic artifact but a genuine historical talisman, an object that connects its holder to one of the most significant calendrical and psychological thresholds in the history of human civilization. The $550 million value of this coin represents more than just the logical endpoint of today's escalating sequence of values. It represents the intersection of every factor that can possibly combine to create maximum numismatic value in a single object. Extreme technical rarity, dramatic and visually overwhelming error character, impeccable certified condition, extraordinary historical and cultural context, compelling and emotionally resonant provenance. A global collector market operating at peak competitive intensity, and the kind of singular, unrepeatable character that makes the finest known example of a coin variety not just the best of many but the only one of its kind in the most absolute and permanent sense of that phrase. And so we arrive here at the end of today's video, at the end of a journey that began with a 1965 quarter worth $345 million and climbed through 6 extraordinary coins to this final summit of $550 million. And I want you to sit for a moment in the full reality of what you have learned today, because you are leaving this video as a fundamentally different person than you were when you arrived, a person who will never look at a quarter the same way again, a person who understands that the gap between face value and true value is not a financial concept but a philosophical one. A person who knows now with absolute certainty that extraordinary things hide inside ordinary appearances with a consistency and a patience that rewards exactly the kind of careful, knowledgeable, curious attention that you have given to this video today. And I want you to carry that knowledge with you into every moment of your life from this point forward, into every handful of change you receive, every coin jar you encounter, every old collection you inherit or discover or come across by accident in a box of childhood belongings on a quiet evening at home. Because the treasure is real, the value is real, the possibility of discovery is real, and the only thing that stands between you and it is the decision to look carefully enough and the knowledge of what you're looking for. And today you have both.